Welcome, everyone. It's Sunday afternoon, and we're delighted to have our Aaron Taylor Kuffner, who's our visionary artist for the craft show, but also the creator of the Gamelatron Bodyphones, which is installed on the Academy Art Museum's front lawn. And we're just so happy to have you here, Aaron, and that you agreed to do this installation here at the museum. It's just been great to get to know you as well. Aaron Taylor Kuffner's Gamelatrons are sonic kinetic sculptures based on the Indonesian musical tradition known as the gamelan. I think we all are familiar with the gamelans. For 4 years, he immersed himself in the study of the 1,000-year-old musical tradition at the Institute Seni Indonesia, Yogyakarta, and in villages in Java and Bali. So he actually went to those places and learned from the people who had been doing it and learning it themselves through the traditions for years and generations. And before he embarked on this series, which combines the traditionally crafted brass gongs of the gamelans with robotic technology to create dynamic, site-specific installations. Trained in painting and sculpture, and his resume is quite extensive and impressive. I think you've tried everything. But also having worked as a DJ and composer, Kuffner has created more than 50 Gamelatron sculptures over the past several decades. With his Bodyphone sculpture now installed in a polycarbonate box on the lawn of the Academy Art Museum, he has fashioned an immersive sound experience in which, as he will explain, the whole body serves as the organ for the live experience. And he'll get into much more detail about that. His works have been exhibited worldwide, including at the Venice Biennale, and more recently as part of the Renwick Gallery's No Spectators, The Art of Burning Man show, which was a major sensation. I hope you all saw it. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Taylor Kuffner.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Just gonna make sure this works. Okay. Hi. So first, I actually want to thank the Academy Art Museum and everyone who works here, just for bringing me in, for thinking a little bit outside the box, trying something different. I think that Talbot County, Easton is really lucky to have a museum here that wants to share and kind of edify its community. And so when they had some of the ideas they had and we started working on this, I was really excited that they were willing to try these things, and also kind of that we could align in our vision and how to like serve a community and share experiences of value with that community. One little disclaimer I'm going to give about this talk is that I'm going to touch on a lot of topics. All of these topics are probably worth long study and longer discussion than what I'm going to go into. So if you happen to be like an ethnomusicologist or have a depth of knowledge in different things, know that I'm just brushing upon them, because what my work is about is really kind of an amalgamation of many different things. So instead of really having the time or the bandwidth today to drill down on any one of those things, which are all fascinating topics to me, and I'll try to restrain myself so as not to digress too much, the idea here is to more like show a tasting of all these different things that kind of roll into the work. So it's all worth long study, each kind of top frame, but we're gonna keep it kind of light and try to keep moving through point by point. I also, if there's time and desire, I'm like happy to answer any questions. If you have a real burning desire for something, I don't mind if you just ask, So don't worry about interrupting me if something's like totally not clear. That's probably not clear to someone else either. So I make what I call sonic kinetic sculptures. So sculptures that move and that make sounds. My bigger mission, especially with this project, is to create encounters with resonance. And the idea of resonance is a little different from what we think of. We usually think of just sound or listening to music and things like that. And especially in contemporary times, most of the time when we're listening to sound, even if it's live music, let's say someone's playing guitar, it probably has a mic on it, and what you're actually hearing is a reproduction coming out of a copper coil that's like coming out of a speaker. And you're not actually hearing the vibrating strings that go into a bell that project out this kind of fluctuation in air, which is essentially resonance or sound waves. And along that same line, we think a lot commonly that hearing is kind of a cognitive function, meaning that like it's something that happens in our head, kind of like seeing. You know, we recognize that like there's light out there, but you know it goes through this portal, and that we actually see inside of this, inside of our brains. And to some extent, that's kind of true. There are these small bones that vibrate, and then we interpret those vibrations into what we call like hearing. But the same way that when you taste something, we kind of think that it happens on our taste buds. But if you've ever had a stuffed nose and you try to taste something, you're like, oh, I'm missing a lot of it, because the sense of smell and the sense of taste are intertwined in a way that is somewhat inseparable. And our bodies, being made mostly of water, actually receive sound, receive vibrations. If you ever, have like a bottle of water and really loud sound next to you or something, you can see how these things vibrate and they move. And every sound that we hear is actually hitting our entire body. And that the same way that we ignore sometimes scent, it's play on taste, we kind of ignore our entire body as a kind of vessel for sound. Which leads very much to what this piece is about. Something that Ben and I were just talking about like at the door, which I'll share too, because I'm focusing a little bit on this piece, which is on the lawn, is that human hearing happens between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. Now, hertz is a measurement of waveform, the same way that like a foot would be a distance. So the smaller the hertz number, like 20 hertz, would be a bigger waveform versus really small waves, which would be higher and higher pitches. We deal with hertz all the time. Like you tune into, what was I listening to on the way in here? WAMU. It's like, what is it, 89.5 or something. Well, that's actually megahertz. It's 89.5 megahertz. That's the thousands of hertz. That's the actual size of the wave in which it's transmitting, okay? Obviously, we can't hear that because it's way beyond our hearing capacity. And we have a lower threshold, too, which is 20 hertz, where we really can't hear anything that happens underneath 20 hertz. It's a very, very low sound. But if you have a counterbass, the lowest note on a counterbass is about 43 hertz. And I'm not sure, because I haven't done the long study, but it's worth long study and a whole different talk, is we tend to not be able to discern notes below like 43 or 40 hertz. Okay, what that means is that if you heard like a diesel engine go by, a diesel car go by with a diesel engine that was reverberating, let's say at like 30 hertz, it would be very hard, even with someone trained with perfect pitch, to say, oh, that's a C sharp. Okay, whereas if you hear something in 500 hertz or something like that, it's not hard to pick up on like what note that would be. So basically, we have an acuity between 40 hertz and like 10,000 hertz or so, where we can hear things pretty clearly. But once it gets also like these really high-pitched shrill sounds, telling that apart, if that is C-sharp high-pitched sound, like, our hardware doesn't work that way, and also our brains aren't configured that way. So when you get below 40 hertz, you stop being able to discern the sound as much as a note. It also means that your body plays a bigger role because it becomes less cognitive and more of a feeling. And especially with low sounds, really low-pitched sounds, because they're larger waveforms, and it's the difference between, let's say, like a ripple on the ocean that comes with a very small wave versus a heaping wave, you're going to feel it more in your body. And so the idea behind this piece was in order to put people in the middle of these really deep waveforms so that they could have a visceral bodily feeling and remind us of the power of resonance, and also to kind of really be immersed and bathed in that to really exemplify it. And then my hope is then all the other positive things that can come out of that sensation will be present. And this leads to the core mission of my work, which is really to create an offering of beauty with a dose of the sublime to all of us. And a hope, a sincere hope, that something that I do can kind of edify, nourish, and advance, my fellow humans' lives. Usually through encounters, one of resonance, but really through just giving a moment of beauty or respite in order to have that in the mix in your life in order to help propel you towards wherever you're going to go. I'm going to play, this is a short 2-minute video. It kind of says a lot about the Gamelatron.
The Gamelatron is a sound-producing kinetic sculpture,
which will frame
originally inspired
what I'm
by
going to talk
Indonesian
about.
gamelan. The sculptures are a combination of acoustic resonance and robotic technology, creating magical, viscerally powerful, site-specific performances, installations, and standalone artworks. Aaron Taylor Kuffner is the artist behind the Gamelatron Project. Gamelatrons are installed all over the world, in museums and in public, private, and community spaces. Each artwork is an exploration into the cross-section of sound, sculpture, technology, and engineering, as well as the tension and harmony of fusing the modern and the ancient. Kuffner works with Indonesian master craftsmen to hand-forge the gongs. Then he fine-tunes the pitches and treats the surfaces, transforming them into sculptural elements. Next, he hand-machines all the robotic mechanisms, produces the electronics, and fabricates the sculptural mounts, taking care with every detail. There is a simple app that allows the listener to choose which compositions the Gamelatron will play. Each composition is written specifically for that artwork in that space. After he installs a piece, Kuffner writes site-responsive compositions that consider the acoustics and intentions of the space. These compositions are transcribed by the digital brain of the artwork into an array of electrical pulsations that results in the moving of the mallets and the music you hear. A Gamelatron is an offering, an invitation to spend time with the artwork and allow it to resonate and hopefully nourish.
Okay, so Gamelatron's a word that I made up, and it comes from 2 words, essentially, gamelan and electronics. So I'm going to talk about both sides. My short background is that I've been an artist my whole life. It's the only thing I ever remember wanting to do. But I've taken on a lot of different mediums. So I kind of consider myself a conceptual artist just because I don't have one stable medium. But I always have an idea of what I want to share. And I'll get into those ideas when I talk about the Gamelatron side of it. But the gamelan side of it is that after doing theater and painting and sculpture and social activism and starting pirate radio stations and a variety of different things, I found myself in Indonesia. And I ended up studying gamelan music in Indonesia for several years, as Ben was saying. And also did some apprenticeships and learned under the gong makers, the people that make these instruments, as well as going to small villages and towns and really getting steeped in the reasons why they play the music and the cultural context for them. And then coming back from Indonesia, I was back in New York, where I'm from, and a guy named Eric Singer, who's a pretty renowned technologist, he had a series of robots that played musical instruments, and he had a grant, I believe, from the Ford Foundation, where an aspect of that grant was that he would bring musicians or just artists of different stripes in to work with his technology and to create, author new works of art with those technologies that he had made. And I ended up being one of the first artists in residence with him. And he had this xylophone robot. in which I augmented to, instead of play his xylophones, to play these gamelan instruments that I had brought back. And that was kind of the peanut butter chocolate moment. I ended up working with him for a while after that. I kind of, not necessarily interned with him, but I like worked out of his studio and tried to build a specific robot to play gamelan, which became the first Gamelatron. And in the beginning, it was more of like a one-man band situation where I'd be like on stage and there'd be a whole set of instruments, and then I'd have like a computer-controlled thing and I'd play. And that was interesting, but through doing it more, I started asking myself, like, does this need to be in the world? I actually played gamelan with humans, and I liked doing that. There was a lot of upside to it, and I kind of enjoyed that more, and it felt a little off. And so it took me a couple of years to really figure out how to use the technology in a way to create something that had a necessary endpoint. And I kind of arrived on this place where I realized I didn't want to be in front of people, that I need to get out of the way of the artwork, that having me up there, I have an ego. I'm a middle-aged white guy, from New York. All these things are stuff that I don't want people to even have to think about or consider when they're communing with the artwork. Essentially, the work has the potential to be much more impeccable than myself. And so how can I get out of the way? The other thing is just programming. You come to a concert, starts at a certain time, it ends at a certain time. Music itself has like a certain arc that kind of needs to follow. Like we all, if you came and had no crescendo, had no ending, like it just wouldn't work. So everybody kind of has this collective like want to build and resolve and build and resolve and such. And so what I decided to do was break that boundary completely, start building these artworks in a way that they didn't need to be like on a stage, to really consider how people were going to encounter it and what kind of space it is. Think of it more as like a sound installation or something that's working with the space. Also, the technology allowed me to do two things that really human groups wouldn't do. One of them is pretty obvious, play forever. The other one, less obvious, play slowly. There's something that happens when you perform and you get good. So you want to play faster, you want to play more complicated, you want to test your own skill. But this is the ego of the player. It's not necessarily like what the sound, what lends best to the sound. And I started realizing I wanted to push the actual sound of each one of these resonating gongs forward. The same way that I wanted to kind of create these minimalist sculptures that really highlighted the actual shapes of the gongs. I wanted to really show the reverberation. And where they reverberated in space then became part of that unique content. And as far as a composer goes, I wanted to write in a way that someone could come in for 5 minutes or 5 hours, that I didn't want to be constrained by linearity, and that I was able to play these more deliberate and even slower and these kind of like really compositions that could build and know a different sensibility of time because I'm not performing. And because you don't have to stay any longer than you want to. And so I started realizing that the technology was kind of built to do something like that, rather than substitute humans. Yeah, that's part of the like a little bit of the backstory. But the gamelan side, which is fascinating in itself, and again, worth a whole separate talk, but I'm just going to give it to you short. Gamelan is a tradition from Indonesia. It's multiple thousands of years old. It's about 2,000 years old, at least. In Javanese mythology, Java is the most populated island of the archipelago of Indonesia. The gamelan was created by Sang Hang Guru, and they credit it to like about 100 AD, give or take. And it's hard to tell if he was a god or if he was just a king, or if he was a king that had godly powers or some space between the two. but he wanted a, I don't know, it's kind of described like he wanted to summon the gods, and so he commissioned the first gong to be made. But that's not exactly it, because that to me sounds like a dinner bell. You know, like, I want to let everyone know it's time for food. But that's not the case. The case is that the God and the resonance were one. It wasn't it was summoning the God, but it was the God was in the resonance. It wasn't calling, letting everyone know that God was there. It was the embodiment of God. And over time, there was then different aspects of God in different tones in different gongs. And so then there's a set of 3, and eventually there's a set of 5. And those sets of 5 then, became attributable to like the center, the north, the south, the east, and west. And later took on in different, and again, these are different mythologies and such, but this is like a Balinese interpretation of this taxonomy of sound, color, tools, weapons, and I'm not going to go through it because this could be its own talk, but the idea is that different sounds represented different aspects of the divine, and that by ringing them, they were conjuring that actual spirit of the divine, and that they had a relationship with the cardinal directions of the earth, with different lights, different colors, different tones, with even different different tools, the archer or the hoe or things like that, and that there were certain things about those motions that then became connected. So it's not just about making music. It's about conjuring pulsations that are in fact the divine in kind of calculated ways. There's 2 main contemporary forms of gamelan right now, Javanese and Balinese. The Javanese gamelan is where gamelan originally came from. In about the 13th, it's probably more like the 14th century, the Majapahit was a large empire, a large enough empire that they were able to kind of codify everything. They were also the main landowners, so they also owned all the gamelans. And it made this concentration of the art within their courts. And in doing so, it codified it. It was kind of like their high classical period. And that became the court gamelans of Java. And that's also the study of Karawitan, which was my major at the Institute Seni Indonesia at Jogja. And so Javanese are really about, culturally, really about refinement. It's polishing the stone down to its smoothest. Their music as well has this aspect of being incredibly complicated, but hopefully not sounding that way necessarily. And they have this principle that I love called gotong royong. And it kind of literally translates to working together, but it has a much bigger aspect to it. The idea is more that through activities that we do together, we help galvanize our community. Example, one morning I woke up in my town, it was a gotong royong day, and there was this huge pile of stones on one side of the street, and everyone was picking up the stones and bringing them to, down the street a little bit. Me being like I don't know what I am, a hyper-efficient New Yorker, I was like, oh, I'll take 2 full buckets, I'll get there, we'll get this done in no time at all. And everyone was like, what are you doing? Like it's gotong royong. It's about doing it together. It's not about moving it fast or anything. And we'd take breaks and we'd have tea. And then it was true because weeks later it'd be like, oh, I saw you moving those stones. We all moved those stones together. We had this activity that was kind of baked into so that we had a shared and common experience. And gamelan, in their culture, would be one of the highest forms of gotong royong. So a lot of times the musical parts are actually very simple, though the music is incredibly complex, because they break it into these small, simple parts that then completely interlock. And so it's the interlocking of all the simplicity that creates this incredibly complicated form. So I'll just give you a little dose of that. Something to note is that all the music is always memorized. There's no written notation. I think the Dutch tried to do a little written notation. I made up my own written notation when I was there as a kind of like a learning guide, but everything's memorized. And a lot of it's done kind of by osmosis. I make the joke about Hotel California, which is my dad's favorite song. I never had a burning desire to know that song, but if it came on right now, I could definitely sing along with every word, and I could probably pick up a guitar and figure out how to play it as well, just because I heard it so many times. And so culturally, it's like that too, where they hear these songs over and over and over and over again, and you just know it. You just know where it's going to go. And so it not being written down is also part of the refinement too, because you shouldn't really have to think about it too much. You should just be doing it and doing it as a group. There's no solos, there's no improvisation. Everything is metered together, and even the transitions to go between the different parts of the song is just kind of felt. It's not like we'll play this 3 times and then we'll play that 2 times. Usually there's some kind of cue, tempo goes down a little, and everyone just knows. Or there's a dancer, performer, or shadow puppet person who then also kind of cues it, and they know at this aspect of the story something's changing, and then they transition. So also, unlike Western classical music where it has a set meter or duration, it's not like that. It's memorized, it's kind of on loop until there's a reason to shift it. So now, on the other side of things is Bali. The real short story, and again, worth long discussion, but we won't do that right now, is that feudalism didn't work out so well in Java. All right, the princes owned all the land. They were Hindu, and no one else could go to heaven because you had to reincarnate, and you couldn't own land. And then Islam came, and some Sufi Islamic traders came and said, "Oh no, any person can go to heaven." And so all the serfs were kind of like, I'm down with that. And little by little, it swept from like west to east, where like everyone just started converting to Islam and stopped being, and kind of it undid feudalism, or so they thought. It changed feudalism. And so the Hindu princes kept getting pushed farther and farther east, and they would take their instruments with them until eventually they got kicked off the island of Java and settled in Bali as the Javanese Hindu empire in exile. Bali ended up being the land of milk and honey, meaning that everything grows there. You do not need to trade with anyone. There was very few inhabitants in Bali, and they didn't want to have anything to do with the new people, so they moved up into like near the volcanoes and such, and actually still keep their bloodlines separate. They're called the Bali Ago, where they don't intermarry, and they're kind of the original Balinese. But the other 98% of the people that live on Bali now, non-tourists or non-like kind of migrant workers, is they're ethnically Javanese, but they're the new Balinese. So they're the Javanese Hindus, but they isolate themselves for 300 or 400 years. They don't need to trade with anyone. So the Dutch never permeate them. They have no colonialism or anything like that. And everything grows, so you don't have to work that hard, which means you have a ton of free time. And you have free time for music and the arts and such. Look, has anyone ever seen a papaya tree? I mean, it's like in 6 months, it'll have a trunk like this big. But that'll still yield like 20 papayas, and they're all over the place. Like, you didn't have to work for that, and it's all over Bali. So you end up having a lot more time to really indulge in this, in ritual, in music, in the arts, in devotion. And you realize that the earth is giving you so much, you're giving it back. And so Bali kind of developed this I like to call it kind of like a Santorian style of Hinduism, you know, where Rangda and Barong, like this multi-titted green, long-tongued beast, has to battle with this saber-toothed caterpillar, and that's Hinduism. It has its roots in different ways and such, but they really went off on their own thing, you know, and yes, they believe in Shiva and all these other things as well, but you know what, Buddha's cool too. You know, why not? Throw him in there, you know. And so they really kind of did their own thing. And in doing their own thing, they also developed their own, like, kind of variant off gamelan. And something kind of wild happened about 100 years ago where their own feudalism kind of fell apart. And the large court gamelans that were owned by the Hindu princes were then melted down, and that would be played by like 100 people, and they'd have these massive keys. They got all melted down, and then they were kind of made into new gamelan sets that were more appropriate for like 15 to 20, maybe 25 people, and they had thinner keys with like resonators on under them and stuff to make them louder, and they distributed that amongst all the new landowners or all the towns that used to be under that feudalism. And in doing so, now they didn't have to go through the courts or the rich or the wealthy in order to play. And now you have 3 generations later where every single village has at least one gamelan in their little town. And when I say town, we're talking like an 8-square block of Easton kind of thing, you know, or a couple hundred people, and they all have their own gamelan set. And you have a religion that requires, I think it was something like 30% of the days are holidays. Yeah. And in order to accompany holidays, they have to have music, and they have different repertoires for different ceremonies or for different times of year, or, you know, all the different reasons. And again, worth a long talk we won't go into. But the Balinese, not necessarily about refinement and restraint and this side of things, they're more about channeling the divine, meaning it comes through them in like kind of an ecstatic way. And they've had a lot more time to practice, and so they want it. It's fast. It's showy to some extent too. There's a secular tradition where they do like gamelan battle of the bands as well. So we'll give you a little taste of that. You can see they're playing a little faster than the Javanese. Yeah, I can hear. Yeah. Well, one second. These are offerings down here as well. All of these things in here, these are all offerings. So.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Memorized too. It's not composed.
Yeah, everything is memorized. So even all that right there, these fast parts and stuff, no improvisation. Everything is memorized, known by heart. And for them, the idea of knowing everything by heart is so that they are a better vessel for the divine to come through, you know, so that they can play with no mind. You know, they can play and it's just happening. It's just happening. Yeah. Okay, so again, worth long study, but we're going to keep it short. Western tempered scale. Okay, what that means is in the West, like if you think of all the keys on a piano, the distance between each note, each black and white key, is the same. Okay, the steps between each note are consistent. Think of it exactly like this, like stairs. What is it, like 7 inches or something? It's 7 or 8 inches for each step in a stair, right? And it would be kind of weird if like one was at 5 inches and one was at 10 inches, one at 9, we'd all be tripping, right? And so, believe it or not, the majority of humans throughout time, before there was anything considered Western or Eastern, etc., we sang and heard and made our instruments like this, where the space between each note was consistent. Majority, this is from Africa, South American to European traditions, all right? It's just the way most humans were wired, all right? And you see up here, 440 hertz equal to A, and without getting into the whole idea of where that came from, again, we decided to peg, for a lot of the logistical reasons, that one size wave and say that's equal to A. And what that means is that if I tune that way, and I have a piano, and Amy tunes her violin the same way, that we'll be able to play together. It means we're all speaking like a kind of common language, and it's very easy for us to like match. It makes orchestras possible. It means that you can take your instruments in and out to all these different, all these different playing situations. You can play along with recordings, et cetera, et cetera. It's standardized. Okay, so what you were just hearing for the Balinese was a gamelan gong kebiar, and it was in a tuning called pelag, which is a 7-note scale, but you only use 5 of those notes at a time, and they were playing a 5-note scale called selesiar. And so their name of their notes, and it'll sound funny, but it's ding dong dang dong dang, literally. It's as silly as do re mi fa sol la si do. But you can see the space between ding and dong, if that's like the first and the second note in the scale, is different, let's say, from dong and dang, and is very different from what dang and dung is, and from what dung to dang is, and dang back to ding. All right? They're not equal steps. Now, why they heard it this way, I do not know. Okay, something just happened. There's only a few musical traditions that are really like that. Now, to make things even more silly, this is just as valid, okay? So the gap between like where ding is to dong is a proportion, and loosely they keep the proportions between each note. But they don't necessarily start like A at 440 hertz. Ding does not have to start somewhere between C and C sharp. There is no standard. Also, gong maker to gong maker, even just like morning to night, they do it differently. The relationships are more of like a preferential set of rules that you follow kind of on an emotional basis, all right? What that means is that each gamelan is tuned differently, and they can't interchange instruments. And it means that that gamelan takes on a little more of a unique characteristic than an orchestra would, because in its DNA is this tuning. Like, it really does sound a little different if dong is a little closer to dang versus another orchestra that might be tuned in Western terms, a whole step or two down, but has dong and dang farther apart. It interprets the music differently, but they'll play the same song, but they'll take on different characters based on who made the gongs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one of the studies that I did while I was there, was record different gamelans and then kind of measure each one and be like, oh, in the South, these spaces are a little bit different than they are in the West, or a gamelan that was made like 200 years ago might have had a little different than this. And so I collected all these samples, mostly just out of my own, my own curiosity about it. I think the easiest way to really describe this, and this is kind of gives you an inlet into my process, where they're creating their own sonic universe the way that they're hearing it. With the Gamelatrons, I have this opportunity too to like not follow any of these normal rules. I'm not a piano that needs to play with a violin, but rather I can create my own sonic universe. And I think of it like this. You guys ever hear of Roy G. Biv? That's how I learned the rainbow colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? So that's this. This is the rainbow. Imagine a world where those are the only colors. This is the steps: A, B flat, B, right? But this is the world we actually live in, where you have all the different colors that fit between the gaps here. And so there's an infinite number of notes between C and C sharp, just like there's an infinite amount of color between red and orange. And so what I start looking for with the Gamelatron and the pieces that I'm making are all these notes that fit into those cracks that we almost never hear, that could elicit different emotive qualities that we might not get from our music because we never fall outside of these steps. Okay, creating the sonic universe. This is a piece called Jiwo dan Raga. Could be its own discussion, but all the notes here, they're all tuned to the same note conceptually. It would be kind of like if you're on a piano and you were like, C, 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 you know, all in pitch registries, I like to call them, rather than octaves, because I'm no longer constrained by this 8-note idea. So it's a pitch registry, where all the notes down here, they're all the same note. All these ones up here, they're all the same note. This is the deepest. This is the next one, next one, next one. But I've slightly changed their tunes so that these notes, when they play together, they create this phasing effect. So I'm going to play a little clip of a song. I just want you to listen to it, and then I'm going to explain it a little bit to give you an idea about what I'm doing in order to create these new sonic universes. Okay, so what you were hearing there, believe it or not, was all tuned to one kind of principal note. A lot of the variation that you heard were overtones, which I'll explain a little bit later. And you also probably heard these kind of like wobbling sounds rather than just a pure sound. You would hear something called a beat frequency or phasing effect. So I'm going to describe this a little bit in a physics way, quickly. Now, each sound has a different pitch. That pitch translates to hertz. Hertz translates to waves. The idea is that each sound has a size of wave, all right? So imagine this blue line to be a sound. Now, as pitch goes up, those waves get smaller. As pitch goes down, the waves get bigger. Now, if you have two sounds that are almost the same, they're going to have about the same size waves. So if you play them at the same time, they would kind of travel together so that they were going down and peaking together. But then through many revolutions, eventually they'll be at opposites, where this one's peaking, where this one's going down. And then through many revolutions, they're going to come back together where they're peaking. And when they do that, the combined is this kind of sum. What you're seeing here is that when they're together, all right, like right here, they act as force multipliers. They're louder than just the two of them combined. But when they are opposite each other, they negate. This is 0. They basically cancel each other. So you go from like force amplifying, cancel, force amplifying, cancel. Now, the closer they are in sound, it'll take longer for them to get out of phase. So it would happen like, it would maybe take a second before it goes, woo, you know, etc. Farther they are from sound, it'd be woo, 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 woo. So explaining that more elegantly, I'm going to have someone else do it.
Generate some tones. And so I'm going to generate a 440 hertz tone, so that'll be in one track. And then I'm going to add another track down here, and we're going to generate another tone. So we'll make this one slightly different. It's 440 hertz, like that. Now let me mute the bottom one and play the top. And now let me mute the top and play the bottom. So they sound almost the same, but let's play them together now. So we'll unmute them. So now you can hear those beats or those changes in the amplitude.
Okay. So very, very simple way of describing it. So what I'm doing is I'm tuning all these gongs slightly different from each other so that when they play, they create this beating and phasing effect, which adds like a chorusing kind of thing. It adds this whole other dimension. It also adds tempo in places we normally don't hear. All right? Now, another little game we're going to play, this red dot. Oh, sorry.
Generates.
This red dot right here, imagine a gong, and imagine this being the knob that the mallet strikes, okay?
A sound wave is produced when force or pressure from a vibrating object sets the molecules of a particular medium, such as air, into motion.
Okay. So the same way that this diagram kind of shows how you strike in this one place, that's where the sound originates, and then it ripples outwards. The size of this ripple is analogous to the size of the wave. If you had really small ripples, it would be a higher pitch. Really big ripples is a lower pitch. I like the analogy of like dropping a stone in on like a placid like pond or a puddle or something, and you see the waveforms. You've dropped a bigger stone, bigger waveform. Littler stone, you have smaller ripples that go out. Okay? And this is what's happening with the gong. You strike it at this one place in the middle, and then the gong carries that. But the anatomy of a gong is a little bit different from the ones that I'm using and the ones that we make in Indonesia. So this would be like the pebble, and then this is kind of like the pond right here, okay? But if we play out like that video in our heads a little bit, you see there's another ridge here, right? This would be kind of like, imagine you put your hand in that puddle, and then you drop the stone. It would start out with that ripple that's based on the size of the stone, but when it gets to your hand, it's going to go around it in all different ways, and it's going to actually make these smaller little ripples that go off. But wait, smaller ripples, higher pitch. And then it's going to get to the edge, and just like imagine the wake of a boat, when it comes, it has one size wave, but then when it hits, the bank, it slaps back at a different size wave depending on how it hit, right? Oh, wait, that's a different size waveform, that's a different pitch. So you have your principal pitch, which is based on like how big the stone is, right, in that first ripple. But then you have these other places which we control how it's going to kind of break those waveforms and have these secondary waveforms, which are called overtones, okay? So what you heard in that song when you were like, wait, this can't all be one note, that was the overtones. That was tuning these other pitches that normally you don't even pick up on because we're so fixated on the principal sound. But when everything has the same principal sound, then we become more keen to all the differences in the overtones. Gong making in Indonesia. This is Bronze Era stuff. literally. All right. We use 3 parts copper and 1 part tin. Copper usually we can scavenge because it's pretty regularly available. I actually have a deal with a place that like melts down copper, where people it's a salvage yard where people bring back brass vases and things like that, and they melt them down, and then we get when they melt them down, they separate out all the other metals and they take the copper. Tin's harder to come by because it's not conventionally used so much anymore. There's a lot of better replacement for tin. And so we usually have to buy ingots of tin. And believe it or not, tin is like 4 times more expensive than copper now. Not because it's not readily available, it's just there's no reason to mine it, so there's kind of a scarcity of it. We melt the 2 together. That's what classic bronze is. All right. Nowadays, you don't talk about bronze and brass are kind of interchangeable. They're really just red metals. Anything that its majority is copper, and then everything else that goes into it, you can call it brass, you can call it bronze, but usually it's like C640, and that'll be like a naval brass or something. And what that 640 is kind of like its chemical compound. That means it has X amount of zinc and X amount of et cetera. But this is old school. The reason why the Bronze Era happened is because copper and tin have very similar melting points, okay? In order to make complex alloys, usually what you'd have to do is each metal has different melting points. So you'd have to heat each metal individually, be able to bring them to the same amount of melting, or same degree of liquidization, and then merge the 2. But copper and tin have close enough melting things that you can put them both in the same crucible, heat them under the same fire, melt them, and then they merge themselves without doing really anything. And then when they cool, they're much stronger than either one of them are because they're both very, very soft metals. And the idea is really simple. You know, imagine you had a pattern like this, all straight lines, right? How strong is that if you were going to build a floor that was just beams like this? When you get into the center, they get weak. But now, crisscross the patterns. Have any kind of pattern laid over a pattern, it becomes stronger. And so that's the idea of alloys, and why the Bronze Era was a real revolution, is because you went from just having uniform patterns, which is essentially what copper would be, or any base metal or base material is, but then having 2 molecular structures over top of each other, then you're able to have like a kind of crisscrossing pattern, and you have like horizontal and vertical support and things like that, and so it becomes much, much stronger, which means you can make a gong, you can make something bigger that one will hold resonance, okay, which is in part because they're forcing all the molecules together by pounding them. It's kind of like dominoes. If you have like one domino and you set them up really close to each other and you knock it down and they all fall, it's because a little bit of effort on this one can transfer a lot of energy because they're really close and they're transferring it. But if the molecules are far apart, either they'll fall and not touch, or they'll fall and just hit a little bit here and they don't have a lot of transfer of energy. So by pounding this bronze, you're forcing the molecules closer and closer together. It's like pushing your dominoes together so that when you hit one part, the entire thing rings as one. All right? And this is a video I just shot. These are the guys that I work with in Surakarta. Yeah. This is, and this is like 3 years ago. Okay, this isn't an ancient video, though it could be done and was done 1,000 years ago. So it's a coal fire. That's about 50 kilos, or I'm sorry, 50 pounds of bronze. So you do that. It's like the best CrossFit workout. You then, when it gets too cool, you have to put it back in the fire, heat it up, take it back out, and pound. and usually you pound to the same spot, and the one person rotates it so that you have kind of a consistent pounding across the entire thing. You use different sized hammers for different stages, but nothing is cast. It's not like you have a prototype and then you just pour into that prototype. You actually just weigh out how much it's going to be. And if you're going to make a gong, let's say that's 80 centimeters, well, you probably need about 70 pounds. So you pour out 70 pounds into like kind of a pancake mold, and then you just heat and pound, and slowly it's like making pizza in slow motion, or just like slowly like spreading it out and then heating and curving it and forming it. But what it means is it's all one piece, which means the entire mass really vibrates. And then the knob is the place that's designated to hit, so you have a certain amount of control over what sound's going to be made. Now, you can strike different places and you're going to get different sounds, much like you've probably seen with like tam-tams or the gong show kind of gongs where you have this splattering of like versus these gongs where they have really one principal tone, and then we're tuning these overtones so we get much more precise. Okay, Gamelatron making, you with me? Is this fun still? Yeah? Okay. Great. Again, all these topics are things that I would love to like drill down even more, and I'm just opening up a curiosity, but I want to keep kind of moving so that you get like the scope of all the different parts coming into this. So after the gongs are made, where I kind of start with things is like creating that sonic universe. I think of that as mixing my paints. Instead of just taking whatever comes out of the tube, or what were you saying about the Crayola colors, instead of just taking a Crayola color, which would be like A sharp, I really try to like find the pitch that works with me, literally resonates with me, and then I try to find other gongs that have relationships that are unique and beautiful to those sounds. And I say, okay, if I'm going to make a piece with, let's say, 10 gongs, I'm going to mix 10 different paints. Some of them might be just slight variations, a teal and a teal with a little more blue, and that would be, part of my palette. And the next phase really is I'm thinking about how are these sounds going to live in space. I do a lot of 3D modeling, so I create kind of, the shapes and kind of build a visual layout that I'm also thinking about where the sound is going to be. The part that you don't see in this picture is that there's two more of these that are behind you, and it's an octagon-shaped room. And I'm really thinking about how that surrounds people. And the notes that are over here, a lot of times are the same notes here, but they have that phasing effect. So I'm creating this kind of like full-room stereo and such. And so the piece starts with this idea of sound, and then it's how does sound live in space. And then I do metal fabrication. Majority of the stuff I do out of my studio in Brooklyn. I do work with a couple friends of mine if I need tools I don't have and things. But it's mostly steel, bronze, aluminum. I weld all these pieces together based on my drawings here. And this is just a picture of my studio, of a kind of like welding shop. And then I do surface finishing. This is where you get into more the sculptural side of me. This is an example of powder coating. It's like this durable ceramic paint. I also patina and do different kinds of seals, sometimes gilding and stuff like that. And this is where I'm thinking about the visual aspect and how the beauty of the piece can interplay with the sound. See this a little more close up. And you also get a picture here of, these are things that I hand machine. These are essentially the levers, and this is an electromagnet. And I'll show that in a little more detail in a sec. So when I say I machine them, you have all these parts here. These are all made from architectural aluminum. I use these like 1940s style mills, the same way that munitions would have been made in World War I and II and things like that. it's just a way, it's kind of like a drill press that also can go side to side and up and down in a different way. And I make these parts that fit into each other so that they can become these like little levers. Over here are more solenoids, which are electromagnets. Mallets, these are all teak wood. I usually use teak wood because they have a high oil content, and so they're a little more resistant to like changes in temperature and things like that. This is waxed cotton. This is my variation on kind of traditional gamelan mallets, made obviously not for the hand, but made for the lever. So I insert these things that I machine into the mallet, so this becomes like a lever that I can attach to the sculpture. This is all turned on a lathe. I do this. I also have someone in Bali that has prototypes that copies the prototypes as well, and it's somebody who I've learned under. He's the master. I'm the apprentice on it. These are more mechanisms for different size mallets to hit different kinds of gongs. These all have bicycle tires on the inside. And again, I'm fashioning these all off of what they do in Indonesia and then kind of making my own variant so that they work for this purpose. Streamlined in a different way because I'm limited a little bit by like the amount of power I can have versus like someone who can really give it a whack. I have to like kind of balance things out differently. And over time, the last 11 years, I've kind of developed a whole suite of different kinds of like mallets and mechanisms they use. Surface finishing. So it's one thing to make the gongs. It's another thing to tune the gongs. But in Indonesia, what I find is that they use wood carvings for the instruments, and that's the art. The actual gongs or keys and things like that, they're not really, their form is function. They're just supposed to make this sound. They don't really care what they look like. But I looked at it and said, oh my God, these things could be a Brancusi sculpture, you know, like if you treated them in a certain way. So it's a long process of sanding, using a rasp, sanding, wet sand, and eventually to polishing to be able to turn surfaces into mirrors, or using different kinds of patinas as I'm doing here. I first made them into mirrors, and then I added these different patina chemical ways of changing their color. And I use this like they're canvases. And I see the gongs themselves as these beautiful sculptural canvas potential. And that's kind of a later stage where I'm really thinking about the aesthetics of the piece. So functional sculpture, this gets into the kinetic side of it. What I have right here, this is called a tubular solenoid, and it's an electromagnet. So everyone knows what a magnet is. This is a magnet that is essentially off until it gets electricity. When you give it a little pulse of electricity, then it turns into a magnet. So this is a hollow shaft, and then you have a pin right here. This is a lead-alloy steel pin. It's very magnetic prone. And it just sits here. It's dangled off this lever, which you saw in some of the early pictures. And when this gets electricity, it magnetizes and pulls this pin in. And that's what allows this to move because they're attached. All right? Every moving part on all my Gamelatrons, they're just magnets. There's no motors, all right? And all I'm doing is regulating the amount of electricity and for how long and how much to these magnets in order to create different kinds of strikes, harder, softer, staying down longer, or shorter. And then on the back side of this is a spring to help it recoil. And I can also control the mechanics here about how deep this pin goes in and how tight this is in order to create like necessary friction and things like that so it doesn't like wiggle around too much and such. And I do that by using a physical computing system. So these are PCBs, printed circuit boards. I worked with an awesome team called LumaGeek, Jojo Martin and John Taylor, who are computer engineers, proper computer engineers. I prototype a lot myself, but I'm still an artist. You don't always want to trust an artist with all your electronics. So I would get like something that worked, and then I would go to them and be like, how do we make this work like at industry, top-level industry standards? So this is kind of like a product that I make just for the Gamelatron. It's proprietary, and it's our intellectual property. So what you have here is different ports, okay? You take in network messages. This is a Cat5. And then those network messages are in the form of a kind of like a digital player piano scroll. All right, imagine this on its side. Looks like a player piano scroll. So time is this x-axis, and different pitches are the y-axis. And then each time you see a little one here, those are different times that this specific note should turn on and off. Okay? And those kind of messages is what is streamed over a network to this, and then it gets interpreted, goes through a couple different computer chips, which, again, worth longer study than the talk than we're going to have right now, in order to regulate the way in which the electricity is turned on. But then essentially it turns on electricity here, and it goes out to that electromagnet and turns it on. And the last part, after everything is built, then I install it wherever it's going to live. And I create what I call like site-responsive compositions. So I think about, one, the acoustics of that space, okay? What the sounds are going to sound like in that room. And I try to think of the room as the bell of a guitar, that it's inseparable from the actual artwork, that it is part of the artwork because it's holding the resonance of that artwork. And the same way that you would say EQ for a band would EQ a room in order to try to get it to sound like they wanted to, I do a similar thing where I really listen to the way in which each one of the instruments sound, and then I know, whoa, this one sounds really bright because it's maybe reflecting off that wall in a way, and then I like dial it back and calibrate it in certain ways so I can kind of like EQ it. But also I think about the intention. Like, why does this need to exist here? What's the most appropriate, how can it serve best that space or the people in that space? Is this something that's maybe part of a meditation practice? You know, maybe you want 10 minutes of peace. Is this something you want to have in the background where it's not even songs, but framing silence rather than filling it? Is this something where you want a dose of it and someone wants to walk in and press play and you get this full feeling of this sensation? You know, it could be all of the above. So I'll write a suite, like an album's worth or something, or an EP's worth of different songs that then can be played back that fit the acoustics as well as the intention of that space. This is one in that I did a little while ago in Thailand, where it also takes in the consideration of architecture. So they had a kind of problem where they were having a hard time deciding on how to make, this is a stairwell, and I was like, oh, how about I make an artwork that actually becomes your kind of stairwell barrier? And what is interesting too is that also down these stairs you have other areas, and so I write the songs from below and write the songs from far away and try to look at it more like, how does this serve the entire setting? And so after all of this, I get to be a composer and a musician, where the final stage after installing is where I can really dig down and create, you know, the actual music and the actual content. But the content in a lot of ways is really constrained by the cosmic, you know, the sonic universe that I'm making, you know, because I'm not using every color available. I'm using these really specific colors. And it's also to some degree built into how and where the gongs are and what kind of acoustic effects happen there. So I'm listening to it to give me information on like what works best. So I create this whole thing, but in some way I become subservient to it because I allow it to do what it was kind of made to do, and then my job is to just help fulfill its best practices based on, you know, how, where, and what it was installed to do, and how its DNA is already made to be. So, yeah, this one it took a while. This is part of a bigger piece, which you're gonna see. This one's ridiculous. Believe it or not, it is. Yeah. And not even a primary private residence, yeah. So this is 1/3 of the piece. This is in Phuket, in Thailand. No, they're actually all, there's a rope that goes through all of them, and so they won't fall. They're all kind of tied in. Yeah. This is right on the ocean, and it's up on the kind of a top of a hill, and then there's a bunch of spaces that people hang out in all around. And so it's really about being this like ethereal music. There's also a lot of wave crash sounds. There's a lot of birds and insects. And so I saw them as kind of part, I didn't want to make music that was filled too much because I wanted to have them be able to have their solos kind of over top. I was like laying a bed of music for the nature to be able to kind of play with it in one orchestra. So we're going over a little bridge now, and this is a whole nother space that has a whole nother piece in it. It's the brother and sister. And then just below it, there's another one, and they all play together. A long time. For this one, it was a long time. Weeks. Yeah, weeks. And I go back every year, and with this client, I actually write. He kind of has a content plan, so I go back every year and I write another album, and then he keeps the like 2016 album, the 2017 album, 2018, and then you can play back the different moods and things like that. I also have a scheduler, so different days, different times of day. There's this great moment around sunset where they have these cicadas that come out. And so I wrote this cicada song. And so it turns on at different times, working with it. But that's unique to this place, you know. But every place has that. Well, normally not a lot. But in this setting, they get like typhoons and stuff. But they have a big staff. So mostly you just have to keep it clean from dust and debris and make sure that everything, you know, all the moving parts move. I put all the pieces online, so I can actually log into this artwork from afar, and then they have people on site where we can do video conversations, and I can look at the pieces and make slight adjustments. So yeah, these are a bunch of people just sleeping and hanging out. So. Oh yeah, and this is a controller over here, so you have different buttons that control different songs, and they also have an iPad which gives you descriptions and such. So, yeah. Anyway, and with that, this is the end phase of the talk, but yeah, really happy to be able to share with all of you. So yeah. Were there any other little questions? Yeah. What did they think there? Oh, you know, it's funny. When I lived in Indonesia, I joke that I was like trying to be Indonesian, you know? I was like trying to follow every rule, and I was trying to be, you know, to blend as much as possible. It was never going to happen. And so when I came back and I started doing this project, I was kind of ashamed because I agreed with Gotong Royong with this idea of working together, and I was doing something blasphemous. One person playing the whole thing seemed wrong. I think that's also what helped motivate me to like move away from being a one-man band and to use the technology to fill a niche that wasn't possible for people to play in. And I became more and more comfortable in that role. That doesn't answer your question. Yeah, so I thought that I was shy to tell anyone about it. Even the guys I was working with, the gong makers and stuff, I was like a little like, gosh, I don't know if they're going to want to work with me anymore. And then I had just done a big project at Burning Man, where Burning Man has this ritual where there's this big temple in the middle of their city. And it's a place where it's made of wood, people go there and they put up notes or they write on the walls remembrances, effigies, things like that of something they've lost, people they've lost, and things like that. And at the end of the week, communally, they burn that temple down, and it's like releasing all of their thoughts and feelings and allowing them to move on. And in 2011, I had a Gamelatron much bigger than this one that it was went up like in spirals up like 60 feet, and there was just little ones placed all over. And people would come into the middle of this spire and just spontaneously pray and cry and just inhabited it. I feel like I should find a picture for you, because I'm pretty sure I have some. Anyway, so while I did that project, and then I was back in Indonesia, and I was meeting with my gong maker who he had just had a stroke, and because of that, he was really, really slowed down to a point that it was almost painful to talk to him. Yeah. And this is not seeing the upper half and the back half, okay? And something really, it still chokes me up when I think about it, because I realized the level of service that I was making this music in order to help people move through their trauma, move through the things that were holding up in their lives. And it just acted as this way of bringing people together, holding them in this space. And I remember showing this gong maker, Made Rendi, who I'd worked with for years in Bali, these pictures. And very slowly he asked me, what are they doing? And I was like, we're going to burn this whole thing down. And they're making effigies on the wall, all these things here. These are clothing, photographs, pictures of their loved ones. And the music from the gongs that he made was playing, serenading, aiding them on their path. And so in that context, it became really clear that it was absolutely fine what I was doing. And that he was so excited that this was the context. A lot of times if Westerners have gamelan, it's like a university, and they're teaching an ethnomusicology class, and they think gamelan's important enough to have it as one of their features, and then they can offer it as elective, and you can kind of learn something about it. This was fitting into people's lives in this special spiritual place. And it really deepened our friendship and our understanding. And it also, what I came to realize is that, remember when I told you about the beginning of gamelan, the beginning of the gongs? That it was this god, king, 2,000 years ago who wanted to summon the gods? Since that time, they went through animism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Hindu Santorianism, Islam, even Christian churches will have gamelan. The reason why is because it's part of their spiritual practice, and that they realize there's something strong and affirming to the resonance, to that sound, that they are conjuring God. Now, it's their culture that determines how they play it and in what context they play it. But it's their humanity that we all share that says, I'm feeling something here. I'm feeling the divine. And that it doesn't matter if you're a Balinese Hindu, you can also feel it if you're a person going to Burning Man or anyone in this room. And there's a certain universality. And I realized that the way in which they played, even the concept of gotong royong, that was an expression of their culture. Not necessarily, it was their interpretation of their priorities as a society and as a religion. But that was unique to them. But the God side, that essence, the divine side, was something they were kind of co-opting in order to express this. And then I realized in my work, I can strip away a lot of that dogma so that instead of you not being able to access that power because you're not a Balinese Hindu, that there's other contexts that meet us where we're at in our lives that make it possible for us to also, dip our bodies to bask in this resonance as well, and to have it play those kind of contexts. And I think within that realm, I became less shy about what I was doing. And once I did, it's so funny because the Indonesians and the gamelan players and my teachers and all that stuff, they did not care. They were like, this is great. This is so much fun. They weren't so strict about it. I was the one when I lived in Indonesia that was like, the convert is always the stalwart, it's like I was the one who was like taking things so seriously. They're like, we're changing music all the time. We're doing things different. It's fine. We didn't expect you to do what we do. That's weird. The only people that I've had pushback from a lot of times would be like ethnomusicology professors that think that, and they have good reason to, they want to protect the tradition in order to have it live on, and that any kind of augmentation from that is seen as odd. Whereas the Indonesians are like, we're always changing and shifting. We didn't expect you to do it this way. This is super cool. And then I've even since met with, like, say, the Indonesian ambassador to the United States and discussing the fact that, like, yeah, I've had years where even just take the Renwick show, like 800,000 people went to that show. There's no gamelan group that plays for 800,000 people. I mean, that's Rolling Stones numbers, okay? And yeah, it's not traditional, it's not totally normal and stuff like that, but I am now the most prolific gamelan group of all time. And it acts as an access point to the traditional. I don't think anyone thinks this is what gamelan is, but it can be a way for people to get interested in it, and it does expand the cultural legacy, which in a way does serve a great role to even the very conservative ethnomusicologists that might protest to it, and even recognizing the larger context for this whole musical tradition in order to live into the future. And even as a business, my second biggest market is Jakarta. It's the affluent Indonesians that they listen to hip-hop, they listen to pop music, they don't want to wear sarongs and be served tea, and guys in funny hats and listen to their grandfather's music, right? But they're proud of being Indonesian. But they also want to show that they're international and that they're affluent. And so I fit into this very interesting crossroads where it's like, one, accepting, loving, honoring this tradition that they are really proud of, but they're not going to listen to. It's the equivalent of like yodeling or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, but it's like something where they're like, they roll their eyes a little bit. They're like, oh, a dignitary's coming, so now we brush off the gamelan and play it, right? But then this is a new context that fits into their life too, because they're not going to the Sultan's palace anymore to like commune. They're having a dinner party with their friends, and they're also enjoying this, or they're like doing yoga and and having this in their meditation rooms and things. So it also comes full circle in that way. So it's a new way for even the Indonesians to appreciate this tradition as well, and for it to play a role in their lives that it wouldn't otherwise.
So when they burned the temple at Burning
I took it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I took it out. Yeah. It did not. Was that your question too? Yeah. No. I took it out. Yeah. No.
Do you ever get perfect pitch?
No, I don't. No. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. No, I have trained my ears. I think it's good not to have perfect pitch to some degree. I think that it's like wabi-sabi, my mistakes. You go with your mistakes, and the lack of perfection sometimes puts me in really great places. So, yeah.
So you have somebody who's actually making these for you, or you physically make?
I physically make everything. Yeah, the gongs, I work with a team in Surakarta mostly, which is in central Java. And they'll do the hot forging, which is what the video I showed. And then I'll do the cold forging, which is once we have the size determined from the hot forging, then you can push the pitch a little higher, a little lower by hammering in different places. And then the surface finishing where, you know, it's sanding and changing the surface and turning it into more of a sculptural object. That I'm doing out of New York. And then all the other parts, the technology side of it with the printed circuit boards, the levers, the electromagnets, like all that stuff I'm producing out of my shop in Brooklyn. And then things like anodizing or powder coating, I have a third-party vendor that does that, shops that are set up specifically just to do those things. But the majority of it is really done out of my studio, not to downplay the importance of the gong makers because they are, you know, heroes. They're amazing multi-generational guys. That do this, and I've learned a ton from them, and they're really, really incredibly special. But I'm using the instruments in a different kind of context, and I'm commissioning them to be made. I'm not buying them, you know, already made, and they're all kind of unique. And I've also started to kind of make variations, like the Bodyphones that's out there is a pretty far departure from the traditional by making it convex and much larger, and I'm using steel and brass in a different way for a bunch of reasons. So, yeah. Uh-huh.
Have you done any studies on the effect of the Gamelatron on brainwaves specifically? Are you familiar with the work of the Frenchman Alfred Tomatis?
Yeah.
Who would break down Mozart's music
Mm-hmm.
to its very basic resonance and the impact that had on kids with autism?
Sure. Okay, so it's one of those things that's worth long study that I have not done. With saying that, that's why I'm shy to say specifically about what effects it can have or medicinal aspects to it and things. What I rely on is partially my own instinct and how things affect me. I also do a lot of study of like watching people and how it affects them, you know, what kind of attention it calls to them. I interview people, and I have other people interview people about what they felt and things. This is kind of something that I would like to get deeper into, but I probably work with people that have done that long study in order to do it. There's a guy, Alexandre Tamus, who is like leads sound meditations, and he's one of those people who's done that kind of study. He has like a doctorate in sound, and he hooks up different machines to people's heads while they listen to different resonances and frequencies and things like that. And in doing so, he starts to learn about how brainwave patterns can change based on different frequencies that you're hearing. So as far as the science part, I think that there is something really substantial there, and I think it's worth the study, and it's something I want to do. As a side note, I also have started a not-for-profit foundation called the Gamelatron Project Foundation. It's in its infancy, so we're just starting out our first projects where I donate a Gamelatron to a board, and that board goes and finds places where it can serve a community with a lean towards therapeutic applications. Right now, we're not sure. There's a not-for-profit psychiatry practice in DC that focuses a lot on refugee communities and veterans with post-traumatic stress, and we've been talking to maybe working with their kind of like waiting room in order to have experiences of kind of like Beauty and Sublime with this before they have like a kind of tough talk therapy. It's this kind of like barrier between interior and exterior worlds, and thinking about how to work with people that's their focus, how they can use this within their practice in order to aid and abet it. There's also like a hospice care place that we've been thinking about as well for end-of-life situations stuff. And I think it's going to be one of those things that over time, the foundation's mission is to really put itself deeply in that therapy wellness place, but it's going to be done through partnering with people whose focus is on that, and I hope to learn a lot from that experience. Yeah?
Why did they burn down that temple?
Well, it's part of a ritual of catharsis. The idea is that you want to let go. Let's say something really difficult has happened in your life, and you want to move past it. And so what people do is they gather all the different things that are difficult in their life that's kind of holding them up, that's making them feel like they can't move on to the next step, and they write it on the walls, or they take pictures of it, or they put up different things. And then together as a group, when they burn it, it's like saying, we're going to let these things go. We're going to take these obstacles, and we're going to let them go up in smoke so that we can move past. And so it's kind of a, what would that be? A symbolic gesture of like burning the things that are holding us back, or that we need to let go of. So, and it's really powerful. Yeah.
Do they do it, or?
The community does it. So there's usually, actually, because it's a pretty big fire and you don't want it to get out of control, they have like people that are pyrotechnicians, like firemen kind of people that have been trained in how to make a controlled fire. Meaning it's not like if someone went and lit a house on fire, they know that it's not going to blow away or create a bigger fire. It's just going to stay isolated. So it's pretty controlled by professional fire people. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you showed the slide that had the Roy G. Biv
Yeah.
thing, and then you had the kind of fuzzies,
Uh-huh.
the fuzzies all were kind of related, but then in one patch of up where there was a pink patch, and I was wondering if that was by mistake or...
Yeah, it wasn't by necessarily by design. These are more like this is a color wheel that I pulled off of the internet. Yeah, so this isn't like a somehow exemplifying something about the world.
So my other question is, do you ever have people create visual art while they're listening to these?
I'm sure people have. I haven't necessarily made a concerted project to do that. What I have done, and I guess it would be considered visual art as well, is I have a lot of different pieces in which I use lights. I think you probably saw in my video right in the beginning, you probably saw some dark things where there's like lights flashing around. So I have some pieces where under each gong there are lights that illuminate and fade, like as if it was like the personifying the sound essentially. I have other installations where I'll build or work with light artists that will have like a light sculpture, and then we'll take the same data, the same song file that is triggering all the gongs, and then it'll trigger algorithms that turn the lights on and off in ways that are kind of mirror or kind of reinterpret that song in light patterns. That's probably the closest I've come for directly working with visual artists. So. Yeah. Yeah.
One that you showed is by the private collection.
Yeah.
How long about did it take you to create something?
Well, okay, I have a kind of a unique process, and I guess I showed that a little bit when we were going through here. Stuff like this, where I very seldomly go, if I have a new project, it's very seldom that I make everything from scratch at that moment. Rather, I have these background procedures where these kind of things I use in every one of my sculpture. The same is true of like the circuit boards and stuff like that, the mallets, these kind of circuit boards. So I usually have background procedures which take like me a few months every year, where I'm making everything that's going to be common for all installations. I'm making enough to have like a supply, so that when it comes time to make a new piece, what I'm really doing is making the gongs and making these kind of like sculptural armatures. And for a larger piece like that, usually like 6 months or so, most pieces I make about 5 or 6 a year, depending on how big or small they are. But it's in that neighborhood. But if I didn't have any of my back stock, then it would take me much much longer. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of assembly line process, and then so I can focus more on the sculpture and the tones.
Each one of those ones has a different set.
Yeah, they're hammered in slightly different ways. Even when they look like they'd be the same, there's going to be subtle variations even in just like the thickness of the metal, which can make one pitch go higher or lower. So, wow, you guys have been wonderful. I'm so happy to share with you. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
Great.